Ladies and gentlemen, good morning and welcome to this special performance to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the USS South Dakota Battleship Memorial. Now please help me welcome, in their 100th consecutive season, the Sioux Falls Municipal Band. And our conductor, Mr. Christopher Hill. Now please stand as you are able and join us in singing our national anthem, led by band member Dan Mortensen.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
The USS South Dakota was launched on June 7th of 1941, and in August of that year left Philadelphia to head to the Pacific and Pearl Harbor via the Panama Canal. On October 25th, 1942, the South Dakota was making a sweep of the Santa Cruz Islands and protecting the approach to Guadalcanal when it was sent to intercept a Japanese carrier group. Alongside the carrier Enterprise, the South Dakota faced waves of dive bombers and torpedo planes in which a 500-pound bomb hit the top of her number 1 turret. At the end of the encounter, the South Dakota was credited with downing 26 enemy planes in this historic turning point in the Pacific Theater. Composed by Richard Rogers for the documentary Victory at Sea and arranged for band by Eric Leedson, this is Guadalcanal March. 4 Army chaplains of differing faiths worked together to save their civilian and soldier compatriots from the sinking of the SS Dorchester, ensuring the safety of others at the cost of their own lives. It is said that these men gave up their own life jackets when the supply ran out and joined arms in prayer as the ship sank. This composition by James Swearingen honors the memory and sacrifice of these brave and selfless individuals who exemplified the teachings of their faiths and service to God and country by telling the story of the attack and their beautiful sacrifice. This is The Light Eternal. From the mountains to the prairies, from the country to the cities, from sea to shining sea, this great land, the people who inhabit it, and the values they hold are what our country and the sailors of the South Dakota fought for. To celebrate these blessings, here is Eric Leedson's arrangement of Irving Berlin's classic, God Bless America. This commemoration today is also a celebration, and though the occasion certainly calls for solemn reflection, we should and will take some time for some fun. Our next piece is a medley of big band dance tunes that were popular during the war years, featuring the hits Here's That Rainy Day, Jersey Bounce, In the Mood, and Wood Chopper's Ball. This is Bob Loudon's arrangement, Big Band Favorites. Those who served on the South Dakota, and all who served during the Second World War, did so for the people and ideals of America, for the generous people of this great land and the land itself, a land of beauty and features and resources, and a land of freedom and opportunity for those who built and defended this country. A beauty made more profound by the sacrifice and dedication of those who protect it. This is Samuel Augustus Ward's America the Beautiful. Today is, of course, about the South Dakota and about South Dakota itself. From the prairies to the Badlands to the Black Hills, from Sisseton to Hot Springs, from McKinnon Park to Custer Park, from the pheasants to the buffalo, our state is great. To celebrate all that we love about the Mount Rushmore state, we turn to prolific film composer and South Dakota native John Kakavas. This is South Dakota, My Dakota. In 1969, the year the USS South Dakota Battleship Memorial was established, the top-grossing movie was Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, which raked in just over $100 million. 50 years later, Avengers Endgame pulled in over $2 billion in under 2 weeks. An epic film score for an epic occasion. This is Alan Silvestri's score for Avengers Endgame. We dedicate our next piece, the Armed Forces Medley, to all who have served in the United States military. After a brief musical introduction, the march for each branch of the armed forces will play. We ask that former and current service members stand or wave proudly for recognition when the song for your branch is played. And by the way, we're starting with the Navy, so be ready. The United States Navy. The United States Marine Corps. The United States Coast Guard. The United States Army. The United States Air Force. Proclaim liberty throughout all the land unto all the inhabitants thereof. So reads the inscription on the Liberty Bell, a call to action fostered by John Philip Sousa with his march dedicated to this American landmark. To celebrate this American ideal and the men who served aboard the South Dakota to protect our freedom, we close with Sousa's The Liberty Bell. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for welcoming us here to help celebrate today. Please help me thank our conductor, Mr. Christopher Hill, and the men and women of the Sioux Falls Municipal Band. Thank you very much.
We have one more sailor that we're waiting for. He apparently went on leave. Normally the ship would just take off. At least that's what my skipper told me, but I'm confident he outranks me. So we'll stand by for a few sea stories. Go ahead, tell sea stories. So let me give you a little overview of how the program will be proceeding here for the next 5 hours. We will just want to make sure, JP, you're paying attention, and thank you for everybody being here. We will be having the posting of the colors, and of course, as the colors are posted, you uncover. And for that whole process then, we will have the flags, and when they're posted, we will have the national anthem, and then I'll ask you to remain standing if you're still able or are able, and we'll have the Pledge of Allegiance then, and we'll ask our color guard from American Legion Post 15 then to go ahead and be seated, and then we'll have the invocation. And then we'll do, God bless you, and then we'll do some other preliminaries and get on with the rest of the program. We're so honored to have you here. It is such a privilege for us to dedicate this day, if not every day, to freedom and to talk to and recognize all the heroes that have come before us. So if you'd please stand, ladies and gentlemen, the posting of the colors by American Legion Post 15. Uncover. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Two.
Order, arm. Forward, arm. Left, face. Forward, march.
Please remain standing for our invocation from Mr. Jeff Hastings, Executive Director of Warrior 180 Foundation. Chaplain?
Would you bow your heads and pray with me? Father in heaven, we come this day to celebrate. Celebrate not only the last 50 years, but celebrate the men who with honor, dedication, and selfless service and sacrifice served not only the USS South Dakota, but this great nation. And so it's with that understanding we come today to remember each of them. We pray for those right now who with that same honor and duty and dedication and self-sacrifice are serving our country. We pray your safety and protection upon each of them, that you would bring them home quickly. We commit this day to you, and I ask it in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Please be seated. And everyone, it's our 50th anniversary here, but I just learned if I can read these logos, let's not let you leave until we can thank the Sioux Falls Municipal Band. This is their last performance. They did it for us and for freedom of their 100th season. Is that correct? 100th season. Thank you so much for the inspiration. So fabulous. Thank you so much. And so much music has been important to all of us in our spirits and all of our military. And at this time, we have remarks. We're going to have remarks here from Dr. Kapaska. Before I do that, though, I'd like to introduce everyone here, other than our sailor guests we'll get to in just a minute. And if you would hold your applause so you could recognize just how deeply honored we are. Obviously, you've already met Jeff Hastings. He's the executive director. If you just raise your hand, Jeff, again. He's the executive director of the Warrior 180 Foundation. I was unfamiliar with this. I have the opportunity to talk with him. He's currently, his wife, is a chaplain, former Army. And Army chaplain has got some great stories about spirituality and helping people, and especially now with PTSD rescues and individuals who need their help through God, as well as just connecting. We're so privileged to have you here. And South Dakotan now is, he's always a South Dakotan due to the tax rates, right? Yeah, good. Let's keep it going, buddy. And then we have Diane Diekman, who's the president of the USS South Dakota Battleship Memorial. She was telling me 50 years ago she was here at Augustana, probably reading a book, Skipper. And now look at this. It's pretty amazing. She was 11 years old at the time, going to college. Pretty amazing. Dale Haas is second vice commander of the American Legion, Post 15. Thank you, Dale, for being here. Very much, sir. We have Chuck Bronstein, who is the president of the Tri-State Navy Chiefs Association. He's an ETC. Chief, good to see you. Thank you. Yeah, ETC. Jim Woshi, commander of the South Dakota Disabled American Veterans. Commander, thank you, sir, for always being here. Commander Daniel Emmert, who is our commanding officer of the Naval Operations Support Center, and Chief Petty Officer Neil Henches, that's great. Chief is Naval Operations Support Center. It's really great to have we in the Navy look at shoes. So I'm black shoes, terrible black shoes. But it's nice to have two brown shoes here. They're aviators. So give it up for our aviator friends. That's awesome. That's tremendous. And P.R. Olson, who is chef de gare of 40 and 8 at P.R. What a guy you are. Did I say that right? I'll just call you chef, okay? And Deputy Secretary, good to be with you again, Secretary Aaron Pollard, our South Dakota Department of Veterans Affairs, a true leader in not only our past administration, but the current one, in ensuring that people who deserve their benefits, get them and coordinate here in Sioux Falls. We've got offices all throughout the state, And he leads that effort. If you have the opportunity or you know of anybody, your local county veteran service officer, tribal veteran service officers, and individuals, Aaron's really transformed that office and service when we made it a cabinet-level position a few years ago. Tyler Tordson is Southeast Regional Director of the Office of Senator Mike Rounds. We'll hear from Tyler in a little bit. We are just so appreciative that he would come. And also Reed Rasmussen, who's State Director for Congressman Dusty Johnson, who is traveling around the state eating ice cream somewhere, I think. Wasn't that what he was doing? You tell him that he's missed and that he has the physique to eat ice cream. I do not. David Try is the Commandant of South Dakota Marine Detachment 659 of the Marine Corps League. David, thank you for being here, sir, especially for our one Marine. Two, I mean, there's others, but this is a very special day, sir. Thank you very, very much. Yeah. You said something about a Marine. I love it. That's excellent. I have two older brothers who are in the Army, so I usually say, well, for you Army guys, then, we'll speak slower. Watch out, Pollard. Ooh. Anyway, it's such a privilege to be here and to be the MC for the last and the 50th anniversary of the construction of the memorial. We also have, Gordon Spars. I wanted to save Gordon until the end. Gordon, would you please stand? Gordon was the officer in charge. Please remain standing, sir. Not only does he have a classy mustache, but he was the officer in charge of the CB detachment here 50 years ago that laid out the perimeter that we would have been at. And he's got his teams and blood, sweat, and tear in that outline, sir. And it's a memorial beyond all because of your leadership.
We also built the rear turret, straightened out the front turret. It was tipped by the weight of the muzzles. And then we built the flagstaff at the front of the ship, and domed at the rear, forward instead of the aft. We put a time capsule under it. If they ever tear it down, they'll find it.
And where's the time capsule at, Master Chief?
Time capsule under the steps on the step going up to the jack staff.
That's amazing. Well, I also understand Karen Dunham. Karen, raise your hand here. Karen was there as a YN2 that day. It was dedicated. She was 8 years old when that happened. Right?
Another correction.
Yes, sir.
We did not build the outlines of the ship until 1975.
I see.
6 years later.
But the Seabees did that.
Right. Sioux Falls Detachment 0715 of the 15th Battalion.
And were you the Master Chief, OIC?
I was the E7 chief at that time.
Isn't that amazing?
I was the main chief a couple years before.
That's excellent. Well, we are going to ask you to stand by and tell some stories, too, to especially our media people. But a huge round of applause to you, Master Chief. Thank you for your whole team. Yeah, in a bit. Yeah. Yeah, in a little bit. I'm going to interview you all. Yeah, it'll be great. At this stage, we have a welcome from our Sioux Falls Chamber of Commerce. My dear friend, Dr. David Kapaska, will be coming up here. Dave? Dr. Kapaska is not only a physician, but he has an MBA, received that earlier, and then decided to go on to med school. But before that, he was too tall to get into the Navy.
I was.
No, he was. It's true. But what was really good for us is the Air Force recognized his skills, and he went to the Air Force Academy, so he's what we would call a ring knocker. And thankfully he is, because in that role during the Vietnam era, he piloted C-141 Starlifters. We were also privileged then after that service to have him come to South Dakota, where he was a chief medical officer at Avera McKinnon and then the CEO at Avera McKinnon for a number of years. He recently retired because his lovely bride, Marianne, said it was enough, and we all know who the commanding officer in our homes are. but also through that whole aspect too, he's been such a dear, dear friend of mine. We've been worked on a lot of projects over the years, but his new project is the interim president of the Chamber of Commerce here, willing to give our welcome. And all I do is just move the microphone up, and that's what I do.
Thanks, man.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Round of applause.
It's always hard to follow Matt. I have to, first of all, congratulations, guys. This is an awesome thing to celebrate, and it's humbling for me because as a cargo jet pilot in the Vietnam era, my job was to bring you beer and steak. And not enough of either, I'm sure, but that was the role sometimes. But we're so pleased that you're all here. History is so critical to us all, and this is an amazing example. I was just reading a little bit about the history of the USS South Dakota, and of course, there was a predecessor to that in World War I, and then apparently, although I never heard of it, there was another one built that never went to sea, and was replaced, or they melted down, or what did they do to it? And just last February, of course, the new nuclear sub, that's the USS South Dakota. And I think the interesting thing about that is we talk about the long blue line or the long gray line or whatever, but it's the line that connects us all from one fighting system to another. But the real essence of all the amazing machinery that's been put out there, and one point of fact I saw was there were over 70 gun turrets on your ship. And as a pilot, that made me very nervous. Anti-aircraft turrets, I should say. You know, that made me very nervous. But the reality is the common denominator through that whole line is people. And you're here to celebrate these fellows. And I wanted to lift up some others too, that certainly those of us that served in the military made significant sacrifices, some the ultimate sacrifice, and did it with our heads high and for the right reasons. Heard a story last week from a friend whose father had just passed, and he was a veteran from World War II. And he said that as they were telling stories, his dad actually, the war ended in Europe, and so all the troops, lots of the troops were transferred to go to the Pacific Theater. And in the process, they got 30 days of vacation in the States on their way across. And in that 30 days, his dad had married his mom. And so what an amazing situation, but then sends him off immediately to the Pacific Theater, not knowing, again, if he as an individual would come back. But I think it just epitomized for me, again, the amazing sacrifices given by families and friends and communities for these amazing people that go and are willing to give up their lives to keep us free. And that's phenomenal. So I just, on behalf of the Chamber of Commerce, and we have over 2,000 members and 87,000 employees in those companies of this proud city, this proud state, and this proud nation, of you and all those that have followed for what we've done to make this country extra special. So thank you very much. I appreciate it. Welcome.
Thank you, Dave. Yeah, don't worry, Dave. I'll move the mic down myself. Thanks. You don't have to do that. I appreciate that. When he told me that story earlier today, I have a friend that we were very, very close. He's in heaven now. He went just a year ago. But he was a coastie out in San Francisco, came back, hitchhiked back, married his sweetheart. Also during the war, it was the first time. Our home is in Yankton. And so we got married on a Sunday, and then that next morning they needed to catch the train, the meat wagon, and went all the way from Columbus, Nebraska, back out. And so he just was married, and he had a great wit. And he said, so Mrs. Boyles gave them some chicken for the route, and then there were a bunch of Army people, we called them the dog faces. didn't understand that, but he said there were, and he said, was that right? Good or bad? But he said he's sitting and he's got all this cold chicken, and he goes, you know something, Matt? Cold chicken is no substitute for loving. I said, I wouldn't know that, but that's a good story that I'll keep telling. His name was Elmo, and I loved it. At this time, I want to thank our governor. I've spoken with her, and Lieutenant Governor Roden have been very supportive of this effort, and she has asked for me to read this executive proclamation. Executive proclamation of the Office of the Governor, State of South Dakota. Whereas USS South Dakota BB-57 was commissioned March 20th, 1942, and became the most decorated battleship of World War II during its 3 years of combat. And whereas USS South Dakota shot down 64 planes, participated in 9 shore bombardments, and earned 13 battle stars, beginning with the Battle of Santa Cruz on October 26, 1942. And whereas the people of South Dakota are immensely proud of USS South Dakota and have created a permanent memorial to the ship and its crew, and whereas Battleship South Dakota Memorial was dedicated September 7, 1969, in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and whereas the 50th anniversary of Battleship South Dakota Memorial is being commemorated on September 7, 2019, and whereas surviving crew members of USS South Dakota are gathering for a reunion on September 7, 2019 in Sioux Falls, now therefore, I, Kristi Noem, Governor of the State of South Dakota, do hereby proclaim September 7, 2019 as USS South Dakota BB-57 Day. It's our day. Signed, the Governor of South Dakota. And Tyler has some remarks from the Senator at this time. Okay, Tyler? What about the same height? Okay.
Hiani Washday, good morning. My name is Tyler with Senator Round's office. Just real personal quick, just a heartfelt thank you, and just it's such an honor to be here in the room with so many of our heroes. So thank you to all of you who have served or are serving. I sincerely appreciate it. So some quick remarks from Senator Rounds. I'm going to share some of his words with you today. Dear members, supporters, and visitors of the Battleship USS South Dakota Memorial, I'm sorry I cannot be with you to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the USS South Dakota Memorial. USS South Dakota BB-57 was a special battleship. She was launched on June 7, 1941, exactly 6 months before Pearl Harbor. She served in the Pacific Theater with our aircraft carriers. She used her heavy guns to shell enemy positions during the Marianas Campaign. She participated in the invasions of Leyte, Luzon, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa, and she was also present in Tokyo Bay on September 2, 1945, when Japan formally surrendered. Her actions were reported in newspapers, magazines, and on the radio as the deeds of Battleship X, or Old Nameless, because the Navy wanted to hide information about the battleship from our enemies. BB-57 was decommissioned in January 1947 and sold for scrap metal in 1962. However, South Dakotans were, and still are, so fiercely proud of the Battleship X that materials were retained. Parts of the ship and memorabilia are displayed here in Sioux Falls. Many people have donated thousands of hours of their time and talent in creating and maintaining this wonderful memorial. On February 2nd of this year, a new USS South Dakota was launched. It is a Virginia-class nuclear submarine that includes the most advanced state-of-the-art technology. The 370-foot-long submarine can stay at sea for up to 3 months at a time. It is armed with 4 torpedo tubes and can launch Tomahawk missiles that are capable of hitting targets more than 1,000 miles away. These features, coupled with the talented crew that is serving on USS South Dakota, will play a significant role in our national security efforts for many years to come. Although USS South Dakota and the submarine USS South Dakota are very different, they have the same primary mission. They must be strong enough to defeat any enemy who may attack us, and powerful enough that possible enemies will be deterred from attacking us. When USS South Dakota was launched in 1941, then Secretary of the Navy Frank Knox said, "I say to the good ship South Dakota, God go with you, because after all, your mission, The mission for which we built you is not war, but the prevention of war as God wills. May God bless those who served on Battleship X and all of our veterans. Sincerely, Mike Grounds, United States Senator. Thank you.
Matakapio Yasin, we are all relatives, and thank you so much for your lineage too and your family of heroes, and especially all of those who are Native American family warriors that continue to fight and are part of our brotherhood and sisterhood. Thank you very much. We are privileged at this time to have Darrell Ferguson here, and a tremendous honor. He had just told me it was coincidental that we created a hurricane so that he could get out of harm's way. And as you know, in the Navy, we send our ships out in advance, so it's very poetic that you're here in advance. Very good, sir. He graduated from Augustana College and was commissioned an ensign in the United States Navy. He served both on the USS Mulligan and the staff of Admiral John McCain. Gives me the just tingles to even think about that and hear more from him about this. And he was a leader in the program to stop the salvaging of the USS South Dakota, as Tyler was reading, and create an educational museum here. In 1972 and 73, the peace accord with Paris was delayed. The Paris Peace Accord was delayed for about 6 months during the Vietnam era. For those of you who served would understand that because of the size and configuration of the actual table. I was young, but I remember my grandfather saying that this was very, very important. And by the end of the year, the North Vietnamese, South Vietnamese, French, and the United States agreed on a table that had 23 sides to get access to all of the parties involved. And Darrell was able to secure getting that as a solo citizen, getting that table to the United States for historical memory of how important that was. He was the vice president of Virginia Telephone Company and president of Technicom International, president of Citizens United, the largest multi-utility at the time, and simultaneously was the CEO of the Electric Lightwave, a competitive communications company. And from 2000 and 2005, he was chairman of the board of Europe's Hungarian telephone company. He understands communication and the importance in our society of that. In 2011, he took the fight to the nation's insurance companies as he saw the homeowners' rates go up as a result of hurricanes, but determined through research and data that those rates that were being charged actually didn't match the risk that was being undertaken. His work was published by the Charleston Post and ran it in a 13-week article, busted their chops, I added that, and the newspaper received the runner-up Pulitzer Prize for publishing all of Darrell's research. 2013, he uncovered the lost history of Santa Elena, now believed to be Europe's first North American settlement before either Plymouth, Massachusetts, or Jamestown, Virginia. He's writing a book on the details of this. I'll be interested to hear about that too. He lives with his wife, Glenna, in Beaufort, South Carolina, has 5 children and 3 grandchildren, and obviously a man of God. He's a deacon in the Presbyterian Church. Such a great honor to have you, sir. A hurricane or not, we know that you were going to be here. Darrell Ferguson.
It's an absolute honor to be here, and it's not just with the dedicated crewmen, but it's with the members of the foundation and the followers in the second generation that really made this possible. When you think about it, how in the world would you think that someone would develop a foundation, a memorial, the tonnage of armor and iron, and bring it all the way to the middle of the country? It's just extraordinary. And what it tells me is that it's not the artifacts that are important, but it's the value behind you. It's what you stand for and how you did it. I had a very small role with the South Dakota, as in any project. There's someone that kind of rings the bell and has the idea, takes an opportunity, but that's a very small part of a project like this. It's a 99.9% work by the people that make it happen. But there's some interesting things that happened in the launch of this, and I really want to share that with you. It was in 1961. I was still in the Navy, working for John McCain's father as a junior aide. And I saw in like the back pages of the Washington Post, which didn't surprise me, small column that said the Battleship South Dakota is going to be torn apart, it's going to be scrapped, and it had a wonderful background in World War II, and that's all it said. And I just knew enough about the South Dakota to know that it was well dedicated, but I didn't know the detail to say how dedicated and how decorated was it. And so I immediately called up the files on the South Dakota, and I couldn't believe it. I mean, I forget how many times the Japanese reported it sunk. Was it 7 times? I think it was. In other words, this ship was so banged up, so full of holes in these battles, that the Japanese reported to their command, the Battleship South Dakota is sunk. So what the United States did is take the hull numbers off the ship, so that the Japanese thought that, well, the United States has another ship, to introduce. And that happened a number of times. And when I read it and read it and read it, to me, it was like taking a famous fort in the United States. Think of the one in Texas, where the Alamo, and saying, we're going to scrap that for some development. That's what it meant to me. How in the world could you take a ship and not preserve the important parts of it? Now, the thing I didn't know is that the original files, the original records, the original logs of a battleship, at least at that time, were kept on the battleship. They sent copies into the Pentagon of what they did each day. And so I said, we've got to act on this, but I'm 23 years old and didn't know what I didn't know. And so I said, well, to get attention on this, we certainly have to get Senator Case and Senator Munt, on this. I talked to their staff, and they were very excited about the project. I mean, genuinely excited, but they're out of town. And I said, well, the one thing I can do is call up the Pentagon staff Navy officer that's in charge of scrapping ships. So I called him up. And there are 4-star Navy captains like Captain Diekman, and there are those that just want to get the hell out, and they're bureaucrats. And I ran into this bureaucratic 4-striper. Had an appointment, and I said, sir, I want to inquire about the Battleship South Dakota. I know it's going to be scrapped. I'm really from South Dakota, and I think the state would have an interest in acquiring those important parts of the ship that tell a story. The records of the crewmen, the medical records, the logs, the flags, the things that will disappear. And he said, in a sort of a snarly, arrogant way, what do you want to do, take it up the Missouri River? And, and I said, no, sir, I simply want to know, is there an opportunity for the state to have some of these important artifacts that tell a hell of a story? And I said, you are, of course, aware of his record, aren't you? And he said, well, he mumbled around and said, yeah, I guess. He said, furthermore, we're going to scrap it and start scrapping in 2 weeks. And unless you have an official notice to me in 2 weeks, I'm going to tell you that nothing's going to stop us from scrapping it. So what do you do? So what I immediately did is write a letter to every newspaper, radio station, and TV station in the state, every one of them. And I got a horde of response back. But still, I didn't have a signature to come in 2 weeks and say, here's an official request to stop the scrapping. I said, what the heck do I do? So I got an appointment with this captain like the day before the final day. And he said, well, Mr. Ferguson, where's the official documentation? The official request to stop the scrapping. I said, sir, it's right here. And it said, we in South Dakota officially request that it be delayed for 90 days so that we can have the opportunity to take advantage of its artifacts on the ship. And he read it and he said, well, who's this Darrell Ferguson? Who's this official representative? I said, sir, it's me. I'm an official citizen of the state. And please tell me why I can't do it. And he said, you can't do this. It's a scam. I said, well, it might, it's a good scam. And he said, I'll get back to you, knowing that this was going to be thrown out the door. Well, in 2 weeks, I got a letter that gave me the permission to delay that scrapping. Somehow it worked, and I was glad it did. So now the question is, you got the opportunity for 90 days to delay it. How in the hell do you get the interest of the people in South Dakota? And what happened, of course, is when I wrote that letter, replies came in very strongly. So how do I get them together and see this ship and get excited? I was 23 years old, and like I said, I really didn't know the proper way to do everything. I mean, I was a naval officer, but a very young one. And maybe the fault that many of us have from South Dakota is we just don't know how to accept no sometimes. So I got an appointment with the Chief of Naval Operations. That's the most senior admiral in the Navy. And they were polite enough to give me that appointment. And he said, sir, what's the deal? And I said, most important battleship in the history of this country is going down. And it represents the values of our country. And this state needs to have the opportunity to assess the opportunity of taking those records and putting them somewhere so that our grandchildren understand what the hell it took to win this war. And he said, I'll give you anything you want. I said, I want the Philadelphia Naval Yard opened, and I want a jet transport to go to Sioux Falls and take these 50, 60 press people. And so he did it. Now, when we landed, so they picked up all the press that was interested. 50, 60 people at the time was quite a bit. And we landed in Philadelphia, went to the ship, and it was just extraordinary. This ship had retired and decommissioned, I think, in 46. But you look at this hulk, and it was everything you thought it'd be, but patches of a little bit of rust here and there, a fence around the dock and around the slip of the battleship. And then near the bow of the slip was a man that was mid-50s and had his foot on the middle ring of the cable, and he was just staring like this constantly. He didn't look up at anybody, just scared. And here the South Dakota group was just lingering around waiting to get organized. I saw this man, and he wouldn't move. So I went up to him and said, you have to have been a veteran on the ship. And he said, yes, sir, I was. And I said, I had to use the opportunity. I didn't know what to say to him. Here I am, a pretty young man, and he's a veteran who I just honor by seeing him. And I said, what's the most interesting event you saw on this ship during the war? He said, we were off Guadalcanal in formation. And next to Captain Tom Gatch was a helmsman, was a bosun standing behind, taking the log, and that was me. I was the bosun taking the log of the events. There was also the navigator and a couple of radio phone operators, and probably a few more. And he said, all of a sudden on the squawk box, think of it as the speaker that comes out with both to serve the ship and from other ships, came these words, emergency, emergency. This is the captain of the destroyer Smith, and I'm on your port bow at 4,000 yards. And as you may know, in the Navy, when the ships travel in formations, the big, expensive, important ships like the carriers and battleships, cruisers, they position themselves in the middle of this formation. Think of a circle. And the outside are these smaller, faster destroyers, and they provide an umbrella of defense for these important ships. So on this squawk box of the South Dakota was a captain that was out here on his left, on his port. And he said, we've been hit by 2 Japanese planes. Our entire deck, if you look out, is on fire. And we're going to sink if we don't quickly get emergency help. So I said to this veteran, well, what did he do? He said, he immediately looked at the navigator and says, give me a distance and bearing to the South Dakota. I mean, to the destroyer Smith that's on fire. He said, sir, it's 4,000 yards. It's 270 degrees latitude, 27 degrees latitude, and magnetic. And then he said, the navigator came back with that answer, and he said, all right, give me a collision course. He turned the helmsman, turned to port to 270 degrees. Navigator spoke up, he then told me, he said, you can't do that, Captain, because in the Navy, it's a true regulation that a ship's captain does not leave that formation. But for some reason, he felt that he could handle that risk. But he broke every rule in the Navy by doing that. And I said, what happened? He said, every other minute, he said, give me a range and bearing to the destroyer. He said, sir, you're at 3,000 yards. Same course. Tell me again, you're at 2,500 yards. Tell me again, you're at 2,000 yards, Captain, and we got to get out of here. And he said the navigator was constantly telling him in very strong words that he was breaking the rules. I said, well, then what happened? He said, all ahead flank, both engines, when you're about 1,500 yards, 1,500 yards. And as we approached the destroyer that was on fire, he said, remain all ahead flank on your port, emergency back on your starboard. And he said the ship shuddered, like you'd expect. And the wave of the Battleship South Dakota put out the fire. Now, that was hard to believe. I mean, why would a captain? But you know what he did? He did what we do in business. We call the term, he bet the farm. Meaning you risk everything if you think it's worth it. And he saved 110 men. True story. We checked later on with a crew, and one or two of them came up and said, I was on the bridge too, and that's happened. Amazing. It told me that it's more than courage that these men went through. It's a sign that greatness and leadership in World War II is having people that are willing to bet the farm. After I heard the story, and I was just stunned. Do I believe this or not? The commander of this ship that was responsible for us said, all right, guys, we're about ready to go on this ship. But I want to tell you, it's in a dangerous condition. He said, we've taken out all the ladders, meaning steps, several spots on the ship that go from the top to the bottom. And he said, if you were to, they're not well lit, they have a single naked light bulb shining around that area, and if you were to step off, you'll fall 11 stories. So we were concerned, but also it was good advice. He said at 4:30, I want everyone to meet here right near the quarterdeck on the pier. So, I mean, it was just an extraordinary tour of these editors and publishers and TV anchors. And I mean, to walk through and see original medical records on the floor. And you'd see, if you went down in a certain hold, you could read the logs of the original logs that described how many men were killed, when, the number of times that the radar caught the enemy coming in. It was just emotionally unreal because you feel you're there. And at 4:30, we all assembled to take muster on the dock. And then a problem began. Because Doug Hill, who was the anchor for KELO, was missing. And we all thought, oh my God, if he fell down one of those shafts, where those steps were and the ladders were. What a way to end a day.
Including his.
Oh, including him, including Doug. So he said, we're going to put out 4 search parties of our people. We want you to stay right where you were. Now, I had been on this ship like the prior week, just checking it out and where our people might be interested. So I knew Doug Hill. Not well, but I knew him well enough to know what he might be looking for. So I went up to the commander in charge and said, sir, introduced myself, do you mind if I go with you? And he said, well, why would you want to? And I said, because I know Doug Hill well enough. He's the anchor for KELO, and I have an idea where he would go. And he said, well, if you can be useful, join us. So the first place I went to was the bridge, and that's an extraordinary place. I mean, the armor there was like, I think around 18 inches thick. 18 inches of armor. I mean, you just can visualize what they must have gone through. Then I went to the post office. Still in the boxes of the post office were mail. I went to the medical department, and on the floor were crates of medical records of the men in World War II. And finally I said, my gosh, the last place he would go to, if he found it, was the most important place. And that was in the hold, this one compartment I was telling you about, where all the original logs are set. Every minute, what happened, where that bosun would have recorded the Smith story. And the only problem on that piece in the hold is that it's covered with cosmoline, a greasy, how would you describe it? Greasy, sticky stuff they put on metal to keep it from rusting. So, I mean, who would go in there other than someone that really had a passion? And I looked in the door, there was one glaring, naked bulb flashing this entire hold. The logs are there. And sitting on the floor in the cosmoline was Doug Hill of KELO. And he was crying. And I absolutely understood why he was crying. And I waited and waited, put my arm around him, and we went topside. That ship just does that to you. And the message I got throughout the entire experience early on was that. It just fires you up. It fired me up to contact people back in the state. So we got an opportunity here, let's do it. And I was able to get a delay in the ship. The Lipset Corporation came forward and said, there's any part of the ship, and they were the scrappers who make the money off this, South Dakota can have it. And the Pennsylvania Railroad said, we'll give you whatever railroad cars you need, because they felt this. There was a special element that it told me, and it got reinforced when I had about 1984, I met Joe Foss. We were both invited to join Augustana's Board of Regents, so we met at a hotel. I don't even recall which one. And at the same time as we were checking in, I said, Joe, do you want to have you had dinner yet? And he said, no, let's have it together. And I said, do you mind talking about your experience, or does that bother you? He said, I'd love to talk about it. And I said, how did you get into flying for the Marine Corps? He said, it was a hell of a story. He said, I went to both Augustana and the university, and I was having a tough time with my grades at Augustana. I went down to university. The war was blooming, and I had to do it, and I wanted to fly. And being a farm boy, I knew I was strong enough to do it. So the Navy told me that I had to have a written test and a physical to get there. And he said I passed both. And they sent me down to Pensacola. And when I was in Pensacola after the first day, they said, Foss, we want you to drop out. He said, why do you want me to drop out of the Naval Air Train? He said, because you're the only one that doesn't have a college degree. Now, when the Navy makes a request, it's not a request, it's an order, right? It's an order. He said, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to stay here. And I said, well, weren't they just hazing you? He said, no, they weren't. They were dead serious. In the next few days, he said, I wasn't officer material and I wasn't flyer material. And he became the most decorated pilot. Amazing. So what this tells me is that what we need more than ever are people and citizens who are willing to bet the farm. Bet the farm for their religion. I mean, you either believe it and you're in it or you're not. And bet the farm for your country. Thank you.
Amen. That's incredible. It also tells me that, perseverance is what is the name of the game, sir. It's a great privilege to not only hear those stories, but others that are coming. We have about 15, 20 minutes left of the program, and then the colors will be retired. I'd like to take a few minutes here, first of all, to pause and remember those shipmates that have gone before us, whether in the Navy, the Marine Corps, any branch of the service, and especially Captain Whitty and Jeff Welkes from our commissioning board and memorial board. And so in your faith tradition, as you're so comfortable, let's go ahead and pause and reflect on those lives. Thank you, and thank you for you gentlemen here who represent the USS South Dakota. It's incredibly important to us, and we thank your family all here for bringing and keeping it alive. And I just would like to take a couple of minutes, and Mr. Hackley, I've been able to get to know, and he also has a stunning mustache, don't you think? Yeah, give it up for the stash, come on. Anyway, would you tell us what your rate and rank was, so you could explain that, it's the job and the rank, and then also tell us what you did out at the USS South Dakota Submarine Commissioning to bring the past to the forward, to now.
Yeah, thank you.
Just sit.
Thank you. I was a Seaman First Class radar operator and on the South Dakota, and some of these guys here probably have a lot more experience on it than I do because I went on late in the war. I was also involved in the new South Dakota. The South Dakota will not die because there's a new boat, and we call the submarine boats, on the surface now and under the seas. I was privileged to be a member of the commissioning committee, and my job was to present a long glass, which is a telescope, to the navigator of the submarine. And it was my privilege to do that, and I will remember that for the rest of my life. I'm honored and privileged to be here today to help celebrate the 50th anniversary of the South Dakota. She was a great ship, and I'm honored to represent the guys that can't be here or have passed on. So that's kind of my story.
Awesome. Thank you. I just want you to know this is the only time I'm going to kneel in front of a Marine. But it's just so the fat Navy guy here won't get in your way. We have Mr. Schweitzer here. It's his first visit at reunion, and he's a Marine. Any other Marines in here want to yell, hoorah? There you go. I knew you'd do it. Let's try it again. Are there any other Marines here? Well done. When did you serve, sir?
I signed up in right after Pearl Harbor. Well, anyway, let's get back to it. I have some interesting stories. I'm just a PFC, and I had great experiences on this ship. Some of the sailors who served and were inside the ship couldn't do what I went through. I was a 20 millimeter anti-aircraft gunner, and saw action. The first action I saw was up at Formosa with a destroyer on fire, and I said, "Oh my God, what did I get myself into?" But you do everything automatically. At the time you're in this, you don't think of any danger because of all the programming the recruit. And you just do everything automatically. But being a PFC and being a 20 millimeter anti-aircraft gunner was not the only thing that I did. When, like Admiral Lee, Chink Lee, I wouldn't have called him Chink at that time. I didn't know his nickname was Chink till I read a book. But I was assigned, when he brought his fleet, a fleet aboard, I was assigned to be his orderly. And one experience with him, we were both on the bridge, beautiful day, sailing along, calm seas, and a carrier off our starboard was hit by a kamikaze. Just out of the blue. Nothing, no fireworks, no nothing. Just hit the ship and created a fire. Excuse me, Admiral. I had to go to my gun. And that's one experience with the Admiral. And another experience like that was we were in Ulithi, and there was going to be a movie on the fantail. And I had just taken a shower. I had some wooden clogs, shower shoes on, sitting on a bench. And it was going dark, but not completely dark. And there was an aircraft sound above us, like just slowly moving around. Nobody paid any attention to it. But the carrier, who was anchored off near us, was hit with a kamikaze, just out of the blue. And then all hell broke loose. In general quarters, I'm trying to get back to my gun in my clogs. It's stumbling around. These experiences never leave you. But it was fun. Other admirals would come aboard when I was assigned to them. Also, Captain Mumson, who came aboard. And Mumson was the inventor of the Mumson lung. Here's a captain, Navy captain, creating a saving device for submarines. I was ordered to escort him through the ship. He wanted to see everything. He wanted to see the paint lockers, the evaporators, everything on the ship, every division. And I had to go with him. This was another experience. I just a PFC, and that's my life. Wow. I thank you very much.
Thank you. Oh, wow. Mr. Hobbs, great to have you back again. Would you tell people when you served, what your rate and rank was, and the most terrible food you ate?
What was the last one?
The most terrible food you ate.
Beans, rice, and chili. For a few days. I'm Dave Hobbs. I was a gunner's mate on Port Fantail of the Battleship South Dakota. It was my honor to do that, and that was my duty to do that. And I was telling some of the guys that I graduated from high school. I think 90% of the boys went in the service and 50% of the girls. So that gives you a clue what we were about then. We were ready to do what we could to do our part to help save the country. But Food, yeah, we did have a little instance where the supply ships were a little slow catching up with us, and we had beans, rice, and chili for a few days. But the chefs were very ingenious the way they mixed them up. But that's, I don't know, that's about,
That's great.
that's that good enough?
Yes, sir. That's
Okay.
That's great. That's it. You know, Mr. Hackley was talking about the submarine, and they try to stay away from beans on the submarine. My submarine friends say their boats and everything else is a target, right? So they'll do that. Mr. Gee, good to see you again. You have your family with you here?
Yes, I do.
Tell us about your service, when you served, and what your rate and rank was.
Okay, I was a radarman 3rd class, and I served my duty in CIC, which is Combat Information Center, where the radars were. But I've been asked some of the things I remember most about being aboard the South Dakota. Probably there's 2 things that I really remember well. Was towards the end of the war, we were operating off of the northern coast of Hokkaido in Japan, and we were shelling a steel mill. And then we heard that the A-bomb had been dropped, and so the fleet just kind of milled around outside Tokyo Bay. And then when we sailed into Tokyo Bay, we were anchored beside the Missouri and whatnot. We thought the signing was going to be on the South Dakota, but since President Truman happened to be from Missouri, so we got to witness it. We could watch it from aboard ship. And then the last thing I remember was when the war was over, when we came back to the States, we sailed under the Golden Gate Bridge to the Welcome and Fleet Home ceremony, and that's probably 2 of the things I remember most.
That's amazing. Yeah. That's amazing. Radarman, why? Radarman, when did you serve?
I gotta think.
It's okay.
Well, I'll start up. I grew up on Long Island, New York,
Right.
about 35 miles from New York City. And my mother had died a couple of years earlier. Anyhow, when I turned 1 week after I turned 17, I decided I was going to join the Navy. And my mother had died about a year earlier. So I told my 2 buddies, we always did everything together. I said, I'm going to join the Navy, going into New York tomorrow. Well, the 3 of us had the agreement that if any one of us went, the other 2 go too, hoping we all get together. Probably never happened, but. So anyhow, we went in, signed up. Now, one guy was 18 and a half, the other had just turned 19, but I had just turned 17. So we got our paperwork. They got the final piece of paper they'd sign, they'd be in. And I got a piece of paper saying I got to get a Navy release. And so, okay. So anyhow, they decided to do whatever I did. So I got home, told my dad what I'd done. He didn't know I was planning it. I said, Dad, I need you to sign this Navy release for me. He said, nope, not until you get your diploma. I said, come on, that's 6 months, 9 months, longer. You get your diploma, I'll sign it. So the next day I went in to see the high school principal, said, I want to get out of this place. And I want to get in the Navy. And my dad won't sign unless I get my diploma. I was taking some kind of class, I never remembered what it was, but it's 2 parts, A and B. And I'd started A, I said, I want to do B at the same time. She said, well, we've never done that before. I said, well, I want to do it. She said, okay, we'll let you. And the 2 guys decided to do the same thing, so we'd stick together. So about 3.5 months later, we had our final test, we passed. So I went up to her and said, write my dad a letter, said I met all the requirements for the diploma. But the actual diploma won't be available until the fall of graduation. and he'd appreciate it if you'd sign his Navy release. So 4 weeks later, I was upstate New York in a boot camp.
That's great.
And you learn things up there, you know. Well, anyhow, at the time, electronics was a new technology, and the Navy had developed a 9-month school to teach electronics. So I ended up going to that. And they had 13 primary schools around the country, and 8 secondary and 4 final. So I ended up in Michigan City, Indiana. And it's right on the lake, Lake Michigan. And got there on a Wednesday afternoon, and Saturday and Sunday we had liberty, do whatever you want. So I walked around the lake or the lake shore and walked around, looked at the zoo and things like that, and then walked around a big factory, ended up on the main street of Michigan City. And just walking, about 4 o'clock, I decided, hey, I'm getting hungry. We didn't have any McDonald's then, so I had to cross the street, head back to the Army. And starting back up there, I walked about half a block. I came by this one big store. I never remembered what kind of store it was. But the second floor was a ballroom. It had now been a USO club. And I had enclosed stairs right to the sidewalk. So I said, okay, I should be able to get something to eat up there. As soon as I stepped into the room, this girl comes up to me and said, I'm Betty, I'm hostess here. And that. So I said, well, I'd like to get something to eat. So she led me over. She was a greeter. And so we started talking, and some guys came in, some Army guys came in. She had to go over and greet them, and so we were back and forth. And after I got something to eat, she came over and said, hey, they're going to start dancing. You want to dance? I said, I'm not a dancer. She said, well, let's get on it. And let's see what you can do.
This is a great part of the story here.
Yeah, let's see what you can do. So we fooled around.
Oh, no. No. You danced.
I tried. So anyhow, we were back and forth like that. And at 8 o'clock, I decided I'm going to go back to the Army. So I went over and told her, thanks, I'm going back to the Army. She said, look, tomorrow's Sunday. My mother's making chicken dinner. Would you come to my house for chicken dinner? Yeah, I'll do that. She'd ask another guy, go. So that's what I did then for the next 5 weeks. Had Sunday dinner with them and ended up meeting her at the USO Club a Saturday night and ended up married her 2.5 years later.
Huh? Yeah.
But I was 17, she was 21.
We call that a cougar.
Whatever. But it worked out pretty good. And we were married for 19 years. My daughter's sitting out there. And we had a good life together.
Yeah, well, that's what it's about. God brought you together. Thank you. Thank you very much.
The other thing was they came up with the GI Bill. It's probably the best program the government ever come up with. No matter what you wanted to learn, there was a school for it. So I ended up going to Purdue for 5 years, got a master's degree in electrical engineering.
Isn't that amazing? And that led to communications. That's it. We are free because of you and the people that you represent. We're able to live our dreams. All of us came from different backgrounds. And we are so privileged that you and your family would come here to keep this alive. And these stories are very important to keep telling. There are very few World War II veterans, and I know of none that are still living from World War I. And we don't have those stories up in front of us all the time unless we take that courage and energy to do that. So I'm very, very honored at this time then. I'm going to tell you a quick story here that Jim Sawyer wrote just about the spirit of these men and the women supporting, like Dr. Kapaska said. But Jim Sawyer is a gentleman that was on our staff. He's written speeches for the last 5 governors and currently on Senator Round's staff. USS South Dakota became famous for something else during the war in addition to these stories. The youngest serviceman to fight in World War II was a member of the crew. His name was Calvin Graham. He was on the USS South Dakota for the battles of the Santa Cruz and Guadalcanal and earned a Bronze Star and Purple Heart. He was hit by shrapnel in the jaw. Though seriously wounded, he helped pull out other crew members later during the battle. At a later time, in a weak moment, he admitted to his gunnery officer that he was underage. The gunnery officer's name was Sergeant Shriver, who I guess after the war married quite well, a young lady named Eunice. Anyway, Calvin admitted that he was only 12 years old. He was promptly put in the brig for 3 months and then dishonorably discharged, because apparently that's what we do in the Navy. Then, as he returned home to Texas, he celebrated his 13th birthday and resumed his studies in the 7th grade. That epitomizes the drive, like you, every time I hear that story, that drive to serve and to find out a way, as we were talking all throughout today, and let's continue to keep that alive. We cannot do that, though, without remembering those who have gone before us. And so I will ask that we stand if able, or remain seated for taps. You don't have to stand if you wish. Uncover. Taps. Two. Jeff, will you please remain standing? Jeff will give us a benediction, and then we'll retire the covers. Please remain standing if still able.
It is evident that we would not be standing here today without the dedication and self-service of men like this. Father, would you send us forth from this place with that same dedication, with that same honor, and with that same selfless service to serve our country, to take care of the veterans who need help and support today, and to honor you in all we do and say. I ask these things in Jesus' name. Send us forth. Amen.
Amen. Please retire the colors, remain standing.
Forward, march. Forward, march. Color guard, halt. Right.
2, thank you to Augustana University for their flexibility here. The best part of any battle plan is contingencies. Thank you to all of the volunteers over all of 50 years, and you being the spark. Indeed, Mr. Ferguson in that story was most impactful. Ladies and gentlemen, I come from a family of no military individuals. My mom taught us that we had to serve. I have two, younger and older brother that are Army officers, and it's because of you that you inspired us to serve, and because of you representing the USS South Dakota and all the branches of the service that we are free. So let us thank you for our freedom. Thank you. Liberty, liberty, liberty. You are dismissed.